Man mocks a fellow first-class passenger, only to regret it when the truth emerges. The atmosphere buzzed with anticipation as travelers hurried through Los Angeles International Airport. Flight 317, bound for Tokyo Narita, was preparing for takeoff in less than an hour, and the first-class lounge began to fill with passengers. One of them was Ethan Miller, a man whose confidence could be measured in gold-plated increments. Ethan wasn't just used to standing out, he demanded it. His flashy software startup had recently crossed the coveted billion-dollar mark, a milestone he flaunted with pride. His social media was a highlight reel of boastful captions. "Innovation is in my DNA," read the most recent one, posted beneath a picture of him clinking champagne glasses with another high-profile entrepreneur. "Welcome aboard, Mr. Miller," said the flight attendant with a professional but practiced smile, betraying her experience with passengers of his ilk. He returned a terse nod before stepping into the luxurious first-class cabin, where each seat felt more like a private suite, equipped with every comfort imaginable. Seat 2A would be his perch for the 12-hour journey ahead. Ethan shrugged off his blazer, casually draping it over the seatback before grabbing his noise-canceling headphones. A glance at the seat next to his revealed it was still unoccupied. Perfect. Maybe some actual quiet this time, he mused. Moments later, however, his solitude was interrupted when someone slid into 2B. The newcomer's appearance was underwhelming, to say the least. Dressed in a plain hoodie and sneakers that had seen better days, he looked more like a coach passenger who'd wandered into the wrong section. A baseball cap obscured much of his face, and his demeanor was calm, unassuming. Ethan barely acknowledged him, typing away on his laptop, his focus unwavering. "Evening," the man said, his tone friendly yet casual. "Yeah, sure," Ethan replied dismissively, not bothering to look up. He was preoccupied with drafting another tweet for his 500,000 followers. As the plane doors closed and the engines hummed to life, Ethan finally glanced sideways. Something about the man felt familiar, though he couldn't quite put his finger on it. Probably just another tech bro trying to ride the startup wave, Ethan thought with a mental shrug, reclining into his plush seat. A flight attendant appeared moments later offering champagne. While Ethan eagerly accepted a glass, the man quietly declined, opting instead for bottled water. Ethan smirked to himself, shaking his head. "Water, huh? Might as well sit in coach," he muttered, his voice just loud enough for the man next to him to hear. The man offered no rebuttal, just a faint, polite smile. As the plane leveled out at cruising altitude, Ethan's instinct to command attention surfaced. He drained his champagne in one swift motion, setting the glass down with a deliberate clink, and swiveled toward his neighbor in 2B. "So, what do you do?" he asked, his tone carrying a forced curiosity that barely masked his self-interest. The man turned slightly, the brim of his cap shadowing his face. "Tech," he said plainly. Ethan grinned, leaning in as if he'd just found a comrade in arms. "No kidding!" "Same here. Bet we've got some stories to swap." Crossing his legs and leaning back, Ethan prepared to steer the conversation to his favorite subject, himself. But the man didn't engage. He gave a slight nod and returned his attention to his phone, his indifference as quiet as it was absolute. The lack of acknowledgement irked Ethan. Accustomed to commanding the room, he couldn't stand being ignored. His curiosity sharpened into irritation. "You know," he began, raising his voice just enough to pull nearby passengers into his orbit, "the tech world is full of folks getting way too much credit for half-baked ideas, like Elon Musk." He paused, ensuring his words lingered. "Everyone calls him a genius, but they ignore how reckless he is." The man in 2B hesitated, his finger pausing over his phone. But he still didn't look up. Emboldened by the lack of pushback, Ethan kept going. SpaceX. Sure, if you're into burning through billions for a few fireworks. Tesla. Overrated. And Twitter. He scoffed. That whole takeover? An absolute train wreck. A barely audible chuckle escaped from the man in 2B. It was so faint that most wouldn't have noticed, but Ethan did, and it only fueled him further. He leaned forward, eyes gleaming. "What? You think I'm wrong?" he challenged. The man finally spoke, his tone calm and faintly amused. "Not at all. I think you're passionate." Ethan blinked, unsure whether it was a compliment or a veiled jab. Passionate? I'd call it realistic. Musk's just riding the hype train. People like me, real innovators. We're the ones building the future. A few passengers were now glancing over, their subtle interest feeding Ethan's ego. He basked in what he assumed was admiration, while his seatmate appeared unfazed. "Well," the man said after a pause, lifting his head slightly, though the cap still obscured much of his face. "Everyone's entitled to their opinion." The man glanced up, his face blank. "Not exactly," he replied curtly. The lack of detail only stoked Ethan's annoyance. He thrived on being noticed, on commanding attention. This stranger's disinterest, a blatant affront to his pride. "So," Ethan pressed, his voice sharper now, "what do you think of Musk?" "If you're in tech, you must have a hot take." The man paused, then shrugged. "He's done some interesting things." Ethan laughed, loud and derisive. "Interesting things? That's the understatement of the century. The guy's a walking contradiction, preaching green energy while jet-setting across the globe, dreaming about Mars while Earth's a mess. Come on!" For a fleeting moment, something flickered across the man's face. Amusement, maybe annoyance, but it disappeared before Ethan could pin it down. "Maybe he's just doing what he believes is right," the man said evenly, his tone unruffled. Ha!" Ethan scoffed, leaning back in his seat. "Spoken like someone who's never dealt with real-world consequences. It's all theory until you're the one footing the bill." Before the tension could stretch further, the flight attendant arrived with dinner. Ethan chose a steak, medium rare, while 2B ordered a vegetarian dish. As their meals arrived, Ethan couldn't help but notice the man's calm demeanor, each bite deliberate, as though he had endless time to savor. "Must be nice," Ethan muttered under his breath, watching him. "Not a care in the world." The man glanced up briefly but stayed silent, focusing on his meal. As the hours ticked by, Ethan's curiosity deepened. The man exuded an air of quiet confidence, a presence that felt unshakable. Ethan's usual barbs failed to provoke him, and that only made the mystery more frustrating. Adding to the intrigue were the subtle interactions between the man and the flight attendants. They approached him with an unusual mix of respect and curiosity, one even murmuring, "Let me know if you need anything, sir." Ethan frowned, stealing glances. Who is this guy? He shifted in his seat, feigning adjustment while studying the man's features. Though the baseball cap obscured much of his face, his poised mannerisms and sharp jawline hinted at something familiar, something just out of reach. As the cabin lights dimmed and the other passengers nestled into their seats, Ethan told himself to drop it. "Just another eccentric rich guy," he muttered, slipping on his headphones. But as he reclined his seat, he missed the subtle glance 2B cast in his direction, an inscrutable look that suggested far more than Ethan could fathom. The hours passed in relative stillness, broken only by the occasional clinking of glasses and rustling of blankets. Emboldened by a few too many drinks, Ethan scanned the cabin for a distraction. His gaze landed once again on the man in 2B. "All right," Ethan said finally, breaking the silence with a dramatic sigh. "I give up. What's your deal? You've been sitting there all calm and mysterious. Let me guess, venture capitalist, trust fund kid?" The man chuckled softly, his eyes fixed on the book he had just opened. "Something like that," he said, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "Close," the man responded, offering no further details. "Oh, come on," Ethan pressed, his tone playful yet insistent. "You can't just sit there all mysterious and not share anything." The man finally lifted his gaze, locking eyes with Ethan for the first time. His look was piercing, keen, and strangely familiar. But before Ethan could connect the dots, a flight attendant approached with an air of professionalism. "Excuse me, Mr. Musk," she addressed, her tone respectful, yet businesslike. "The captain asked me to let you know your connection in Tokyo has been confirmed. Everything will be ready upon arrival." Ethan froze. For a moment, the words seemed meaningless, his brain struggling to catch up. "Mr. Musk?" The man in 2B nodded politely at the flight attendant. "Thank you," he said, his voice warm and composed. Then it clicked. The casual hoodie, the understated demeanor, the quiet self-assurance. It wasn't just anyone sitting next to him. It was Elon Musk. Ethan's heart dropped. His mind raced through the past hours, replaying every sarcastic remark, every sharp critique, every snide comment he had casually thrown. All of it directed at the man he had assumed was untouchable, a figure far removed from his everyday reality. For the first time on the flight, Ethan was utterly silent. Elon Musk adjusted his cap and returned to his book as though nothing had happened. Meanwhile, Ethan sat paralyzed, his earlier bravado crumbling under the weight of overwhelming embarrassment. Around them, passengers who had pretended not to listen exchanged knowing glances, their expressions a blend of amusement and second-hand shame. Ethan cleared his throat awkwardly, desperate to recover. "So, you're Elon Musk?" Elon gently closed his book and set it down, his expression neutral, but his eyes glinting with humor. "That's what they say," he replied casually, the faintest hint of a smile tugging at his lips. Ethan's cheeks flushed red. "Look, I didn't mean anything by what I said earlier. Just, making conversation. None of it was personal." Elon tilted his head, studying Ethan with an unreadable expression. After a pause, he smiled slightly. "Don't worry," he said calmly. "I don't." The tension in the cabin felt heavy, almost tangible. Ethan grabbed his drink and took a long sip, trying to steady himself. Elon, by contrast, exuded an effortless calm that only made Ethan's discomfort more acute. "So," Ethan ventured, grasping for something to say, "you must get a lot of criticism, huh? Comes with the territory, right?" Elon leaned back in his seat, his expression thoughtful. "I suppose," he said evenly, "but I've always believed criticism can be valuable when it's constructive." His gaze flicked to Ethan, a trace of amusement in his eyes. "Was yours constructive?" Ethan's face burned. I didn't realize who I was talking to, obviously." Elon's smile widened ever so slightly, his tone remaining composed. "Does it matter who you're talking to? If the points are valid, they hold up regardless of the audience." The remark landed with precision, leaving Ethan momentarily speechless. But Elon wasn't finished. "You mentioned Tesla," he continued, his tone calm but deliberate. "Do you know how many lives have been saved by our driver assistance technology? How many accidents have been prevented because of the systems we've developed?" Ethan shifted uncomfortably in his seat, suddenly feeling exposed. I guess I hadn't thought about it like that." And SpaceX, Elon continued, his eyes steady and unwavering. You called it reckless, but did you realize our rockets have cut the cost of accessing space by over 90%? That we're working on technologies that could one day protect humanity from extinction-level events? Ethan opened his mouth to reply, but no words came. The weight of Elon's statement lingered in the air. As for Twitter, Elon added, his tone softening a bit, sure, it's chaotic, but sometimes chaos is the spark for change. Progress comes from friction, from tension. Without it, nothing moves forward. The first-class cabin seemed to collectively hold its breath. Elon wasn't angry, nor did he sound defensive. His words were calm, confident, delivered with the assurance of someone who didn't need validation. Ethan swallowed hard, his face flushed. I didn't mean to. I didn't know you'd be here, he stammered. Leaning forward slightly, Elon spoke with quiet firmness. The truth doesn't change just because of who's listening. Maybe next time, think about that before you speak. The words weren't sharp, but they hit harder than any insult. Ethan leaned back in his seat, suddenly aware of how small he felt in the spacious cabin. For the rest of the flight, he was uncharacteristically silent, the earlier smugness replaced with reflection. He replayed every word he'd said, every jab he'd thrown, and the weight of it settled over him like a heavy blanket. Embarrassment mingled with regret, and unexpectedly, a glimmer of respect. Meanwhile, Elon turned back to his book, as if the exchange had been just a passing moment. Occasionally, a flight attendant approached Elon with quiet deference, their professionalism now making perfect sense to Ethan. The humility of the moment hit him like a stone. It wasn't just about being caught in arrogance. It was about realizing how little he truly understood. As the cabin lights dimmed and most passengers drifted off to sleep, Ethan leaned forward hesitantly. "Mr. Musk," he whispered, careful not to disturb the peaceful cabin. Elon looked up, his face neutral yet attentive. "I just wanted to apologize," Ethan said, his voice heavy with sincerity. "I was out of line. It's easy to criticize from the sidelines, but I can't imagine the responsibility of what you do." Elon studied him for a moment before nodding. "Apology accepted," he replied simply. "It's not easy, but that's how progress works. You're always going to face resistance, especially from people who don't see the whole picture. The important thing is to keep moving forward." Ethan nodded, his throat tight. For once, he had no clever remark. As the plane began its descent into Tokyo, the cabin buzzed with passengers preparing for arrival. Ethan gazed out the window, watching the lights of the city grow brighter. His thoughts turned to all the times he dismissed people like Elon Musk, visionaries who dared to dream big, take risks, and confront challenges others wouldn't touch. In trying to appear insightful, he had ignored the courage it took to persist in the face of constant criticism. As they disembarked, Elon turned to Ethan one final time. "Good luck with your work," he said, offering a small, genuine smile. "I hope it makes a difference." Ethan watched as Elon disappeared into the crowd, surrounded by discreet airport staff. For the first time in years, he felt something unfamiliar: humility. He wasn't sure how this newfound perspective would shape him, but he knew one thing: he couldn't go back to being the man he was before boarding that plane. The message was clear: it's easy to stand on the sidelines and judge. The real challenge is stepping up, understanding, and creating meaningful change.